Marcus Wellington hadn't cried in 23 years. The last time tears had traced down his cheeks was at his mother's funeral, when he was 19 and still believed that hard work and determination could fill any void. Now, at 42, he sat in his penthouse office on the 78th floor of the Wellington Tower in Manhattan, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased a kingdom he'd built with his own hands, and felt absolutely nothing. The city stretched before him like a circuit board of lights and life, millions of people moving through their evenings with purpose and connection. Down there, families were gathering for dinner. Friends were meeting for drinks. Lovers were walking hand in hand through Central Park. And up here, Marcus Wellington, the man Forbes had called the Midas of Manhattan, sat alone with a glass of scotch he couldn't taste and a view he couldn't appreciate. His phone buzzed for the 100th time that day. Another board meeting. Another acquisition. Another victory that felt like nothing at all. He'd built an empire worth $8 billion, but somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten to build a life. His ex-wife, Caroline, had tried to tell him. 3 years ago, she'd looked at him across their marble kitchen island and said, "You're not really here, Marcus. You haven't been here for years." He'd thought she was being dramatic. He'd thought she didn't understand the pressure, the responsibility, the weight of keeping thousands of employees paid and shareholders happy. The divorce had been swift and bloodless, handled by lawyers who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. No children, she'd said, because how could they bring a child into a marriage where one parent was married to his work? He'd signed the papers in between conference calls, barely registering the end of a 15-year relationship. That was 18 months ago. Since then, the silence had grown louder. Marcus stood and walked to the window, pressing his palm against the cool glass. His reflection stared back at him, a man who looked younger than his years thanks to personal trainers and expensive skincare, but whose eyes held something ancient and tired. He'd won everything and lost what mattered. The realization hit him almost daily now, like a dull ache he couldn't quite locate. His assistant, Jennifer, had left at 6 as usual, her desk outside his office now dark and empty. She was probably home with her husband and 2 kids, helping with homework or watching a movie together. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens and took the subway to work every day, and Marcus found himself envying her more than she could possibly imagine. The penthouse office was silent except for the whisper of the climate control system. Marcus had designed this space himself after the divorce. Minimalist, efficient, perfect. Everything in shades of gray and white, clean lines, no clutter, no distractions. No warmth. No life. It occurred to him that he'd built a mausoleum and called it an office. He thought about calling someone. But who? His business associates were exactly that, associates, not friends. The people at his clubs and charity galas spoke to his wallet, not his soul. His brother lived in Seattle with his own family, and their relationship had become an exchange of perfunctory holiday cards and awkward phone calls where neither quite knew what to say to the other anymore. Marcus returned to his desk and pulled out the bottom drawer, something he rarely did. Inside was a small wooden box his mother had given him before she died. He'd carried it through college, through his first startup, through every office he'd ever occupied. He opened it slowly, as if the contents might have changed since he last looked. There were a few photographs inside. One of his parents on their wedding day, young and radiant with hope. One of him and his brother as boys, gap-toothed and grinning, arms around each other's shoulders. And one of him at his college graduation, his mother beaming beside him, so proud of the man she thought he was becoming. "What happened to me, Mom?" he whispered to the empty room. The photograph offered no answers, only the frozen smile of a woman who believed in him completely. She'd been an elementary school teacher, his father a postal worker. They'd lived modestly, loved generously, and somehow made their small Brooklyn apartment feel like the richest place in the world. When had he decided that wasn't enough? When had he started measuring success in zeros instead of moments? Marcus closed the box and returned it to the drawer. He checked his watch. 9:47 p.m. Another evening dissolving into night, indistinguishable from all the others. He should go home to his Tribeca penthouse, with its designer furniture and its silence. He should eat something, though he had no appetite. He should review the quarterly reports waiting on his tablet, though the numbers had stopped meaning anything beyond abstract concepts of more or less. Instead, he sat in his chair and swiveled to face the windows again, watching the city live its life without him. Somewhere in his chest, in a place he'd walled off years ago, something stirred. It wasn't quite pain, and it wasn't quite longing. It was the shadow of feeling, the ghost of the man he used to be before ambition had consumed everything else. His mother used to say that money could buy comfort but not peace, success but not satisfaction, a house but not a home. He'd thought she was just being sentimental, clinging to her humble life because she didn't understand the possibilities that wealth could bring. Now he understood she'd been trying to warn him. She'd seen something in his hungry eyes even then, a dangerous capacity to pursue achievement at the cost of everything else. The scotch sat forgotten on his desk, ice melted into amber liquid. Outside, a plane's lights moved slowly across the dark sky, carrying people to reunions and adventures and all the messy, beautiful complications of actual living. Marcus watched it until it disappeared behind a building, another moment passing, another evening bleeding away into the archive of wasted time. He didn't know it yet, but in 48 hours, everything would change. In 48 hours, a 2-year-old girl with a worn teddy bear and eyes too wise for her age would look at him and see straight through the fortress he'd built around his heart. In 48 hours, Marcus Wellington would remember what it felt like to be human. But tonight, he was still alone, still empty, still the man who had everything and nothing at all. Emma Rodriguez was 2 years and 7 months old, and she understood loneliness better than most adults. She couldn't have explained it in words, of course. Her vocabulary consisted of perhaps 100 words, simple declarations of want and need and wonder. But understanding doesn't require language. Sometimes the youngest among us see most clearly precisely because they haven't learned to look away. She clutched Mr. Whiskers to her chest as she stood in the doorway of her mother's office, peeking around the frame with curious eyes. Mr. Whiskers was a teddy bear who'd seen better days. One ear was slightly torn, his brown fur was matted in places from being dragged everywhere Emma went, and one of his button eyes hung by a thread. But to Emma, he was perfect. He was her best friend, her comfort in the dark, her confidant in a world that often felt too big and too loud and too confusing. Emma's mother, Sophia Rodriguez, worked as the night cleaning supervisor in the Wellington Tower. It was a job she was grateful for, even if it meant bringing Emma with her 3 nights a week when her sister wasn't available to babysit. Sophia had immigrated from Honduras 6 years ago, arriving with nothing but determination and a dream of a better life. She'd worked her way from a cleaning crew member to a supervisor position, proud of every step forward, every dollar saved, every proof that she was building something real for herself and for Emma. Mija, stay close, Sophia called softly in Spanish from inside the office she was cleaning. Don't wander off. But Emma wasn't wandering. She was observing. At 2 years old, she'd already learned to be quiet and small in these nighttime expeditions to her mother's workplace. She'd learned that the building transformed after dark, becoming a hollow cathedral of empty desks and silent phones. She'd learned that her footsteps echoed in the marble lobbies, that the elevator made her tummy feel funny, and that some offices smelled like coffee while others smelled like flowers. Tonight, they were on the 78th floor, the executive level. Sophia had explained to her crew that they needed to be especially careful here, especially respectful. These were important offices for important people. Emma didn't fully understand what important meant, but she recognized the reverence in her mother's voice. She wandered down the hallway, Mr. Whiskers's worn paw trailing along the wall, while her mother vacuumed a conference room. The offices up here were different from the lower floors, bigger, quieter, more serious somehow. Emma paused at each doorway, peering inside at the dark desks and sleeping computers. Then she saw him. Through the glass wall of a corner office, Emma spotted a man sitting in a large chair, facing the windows. He wasn't moving. He was just sitting there in the semi-darkness, lit only by the city lights beyond the glass. Something about the stillness of him made Emma stop. She tilted her head, clutching Mr. Whiskers tighter. The man looked like the princes in her picture books. Fancy clothes, a nice place to live or work, everything shiny and perfect. But he didn't look happy. Even from the doorway, even at 2 years old, Emma could sense it. The sadness rolled off him in waves she couldn't name, but could definitely feel. It was the same feeling she got sometimes when she saw her mama crying quietly in the kitchen after paying bills. The same feeling she got when she watched other kids at the park with their daddies, and she looked around for her own papa who was nowhere because he'd left before she could remember him. It was the lonely feeling. Emma knew lonely. She felt it when she woke up in the middle of the night and the apartment was dark and quiet except for her mama's breathing in the next bed. She felt it when the other children at daycare talked about their big families and all she had was her mama and sometimes Tia Maria. She felt it in her chest, like something was missing, even though she was too young to understand what. The man in the chair shifted slightly, and Emma saw his face reflected in the window. He looked sad. Really, really sad. Without fully thinking about it, Emma looked down at Mr. Whiskers. She'd had him since she was born. A gift from her mama on the day she came home from the hospital. He'd been with her through every scared moment, every sick night, every time she felt small in a big world. She'd never, not once, let anyone else hold him. Not the other kids at daycare who tried to grab him. Not Tia Maria who offered to wash him when he got muddy. Not even her mama, except when Emma was asleep. Mr. Whiskers was hers. He was the one thing in the world that belonged completely to Emma and no one else. But looking at the sad man in the big chair, Emma felt something shift inside her. She didn't have words for it, but if she did, they might have been something like, "He needs Mr. Whiskers more than I do right now." Sophia had taught her daughter to be kind, to share, to think of others. It was part of their nightly prayers, something Sophia whispered in Spanish while Emma drifted off to sleep. Help us to be kind, to see those who hurt, to share what we have. Emma didn't fully understand the prayers, but their rhythm and intention had seeped into her tiny bones. She took a step into the office. Then another. The man didn't turn around. Emma's small sneakers made no sound on the thick carpet. She walked all the way around his desk until she stood beside his chair, having to crane her neck back to see his face. Marcus didn't notice her at first. He was lost in his own thoughts, staring out at the city he'd conquered but couldn't enjoy. Then he felt a presence, small and certain, and looked down. A tiny girl stood beside him, no higher than his armrest, with huge brown eyes and dark curls escaping from a lopsided ponytail. She was wearing pink leggings and a purple shirt with a cartoon character he didn't recognize, and she was holding the most bedraggled teddy bear he'd ever seen. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The billionaire and the toddler, separated by every conceivable measure of life experience and circumstance, connected by something neither could name. Then Emma did something that would change Marcus Wellington's life forever. She carefully, deliberately, placed Mr. Whiskers on Marcus's lap. She patted the teddy bear once, then looked up at Marcus with those impossibly wise eyes. "Don't be lonely, Daddy," she said softly, her tiny voice carrying the weight of a truth too large for her vocabulary. And then she turned and padded away, back toward the sound of her mother's vacuum cleaner, leaving Marcus holding a stranger's teddy bear and feeling, for the first time in years, the ice around his heart begin to crack. Marcus sat frozen, staring down at the threadbare teddy bear in his lap, as if it were some kind of holy relic. His hands, which signed multi-million-dollar deals without trembling, shook slightly as they hovered over the toy. The little girl's words echoed in his head. "Don't be lonely, Daddy." She'd called him Daddy. He wasn't anyone's daddy. He'd never been anyone's daddy. But the word had pierced through his defenses with the accuracy of an arrow finding its mark. He carefully picked up the bear, holding it with both hands. It was warm from being clutched against the little girl's chest, and it smelled faintly of baby shampoo and something sweet he couldn't identify. One of its button eyes dangled precariously, and its fur was worn smooth in places from obvious devotion. This wasn't just any toy. This was clearly a beloved companion, a treasured possession. And she'd given it to him. A child who didn't know his name or his net worth or anything about him, except that he looked lonely. She'd given him her most precious thing. Marcus's throat tightened. His eyes began to burn in a way that felt foreign and alarming. He tried to swallow the feeling down, but it kept rising, kept pushing against the walls he'd spent decades building. When was the last time someone had given him something that actually cost them something? Not business gifts or networking presents or transactional offerings, but a genuine sacrifice born from pure empathy? He couldn't remember. Maybe never. The sound of a vacuum cleaner suddenly cut off, and Marcus heard a woman's voice calling out in Spanish. "Emma? Emma, ¿dónde estás?" The worry in her tone was palpable, the universal fear of every parent who's looked away for just a moment. Marcus stood quickly, still holding the teddy bear, and walked to the doorway of his office. Down the hall, he could see a woman in a cleaning uniform frantically looking into offices and calling for someone. She was young, maybe early 30s, with her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and exhaustion written in every line of her body. "Excuse me," Marcus called out. "Are you looking for a little girl?" The woman's head snapped around, her eyes wide with alarm. She rushed toward him, and Marcus saw the fear morph into relief as she spotted Emma standing behind him in the hallway, apparently having followed him out of curiosity. "Emma?" Sophia dropped to her knees and pulled her daughter into her arms, a torrent of Spanish pouring out in a mixture of relief and gentle scolding. "No puede ser así. You scared Mama." "I'm sorry," Marcus said quickly. "She wasn't in any danger. She came into my office." Sophia looked up at him, and Marcus saw her recognition dawn, her eyes widening as she realized who he was. She scrambled to her feet, pulling Emma behind her protectively, her face flushing with embarrassment and worry. "Mr. Wellington, I'm so sorry. I'm Sophia Rodriguez, the night cleaning supervisor. I brought my daughter tonight because my sitter was sick, but I promise she won't disturb you again. I'll make sure." "Please," Marcus interrupted gently, holding up a hand. "She didn't disturb me. Actually, He looked down at the teddy bear still clutched in his hand. "She gave me this." Sophia's eyes followed his gaze, and her expression shifted to something between surprise and horror. "Emma, you gave Mr. Whiskers too." She looked at Marcus apologetically. "I'm so sorry. She never shares that bear with anyone. Never. I don't know what." "I think I do," Marcus said softly. He crouched down, bringing himself to Emma's eye level. The little girl peered at him from behind her mother's legs, no fear in her eyes, only curiosity and that unsettling wisdom. "Emma," Marcus said gently, "thank you for sharing your friend with me. But I think Mr. Whiskers should go back to you. I bet he misses you already." He held out the teddy bear, but Emma shook her head firmly. She pushed out from behind her mother and walked right up to Marcus, patting the bear where it rested in his outstretched hands. "You keep," she said decisively. "You need." The simplicity of it broke something in Marcus. A 2-year-old child, who clearly had very little in material terms, had looked at him, a man who had everything money could buy, and recognized what he was lacking. She'd seen his poverty of the soul. He felt something hot slide down his cheek and realized with shock that he was crying. 23 years of held tears had finally found their escape route, triggered by the kindness of the smallest person he'd ever known. Sophia started to speak, but Marcus held up his hand again, unable to talk around the lump in his throat. He looked at this woman and her daughter, clearly struggling, clearly working hard just to get by, yet somehow raising a child with more compassion and emotional intelligence than Marcus had displayed in his entire adult life. "How old is she?" he finally managed to ask. 2.5, Sophia answered, still looking concerned about the tears on her boss's face. "Mr. Wellington, are you?" "I'm fine," he said, though he clearly wasn't. "I'm better than fine, actually. Your daughter just taught me something important." He looked down at Emma again. "Can I borrow Mr. Whiskers for a little while? I promise I'll take very good care of him." Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. "He helped you," she said with the confidence of someone who knew Mr. Whiskers's capabilities intimately. "He helped me when I sad." "Thank you, Emma," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "That's the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very long time." He stood, wiping his face unselfconsciously, and looked at Sophia. Really looked at her for the first time. He saw the worn edges of her uniform, the practical shoes that spoke of hours on her feet, the careful way she held herself, proud despite her circumstances, protective of her daughter, worried about this strange interaction with a man who could fire her with a word. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said formally, "would you and Emma be willing to come to my office for a few minutes? I'd like to talk with you if you have time." Sophia glanced at the cleaning cart down the hallway, clearly thinking about her duties, her schedule, the implicit power dynamics of a billionaire asking her for time during her shift. "You won't get in trouble," Marcus assured her. "I promise. Please." There was something in his voice that made Sophia nod. She took Emma's hand and followed Marcus into his office, both of them stepping tentatively into this space of wealth and power that existed in such sharp contrast to their own lives. Marcus gestured to the leather couch against one wall. "Please sit down." He pulled his desk chair over rather than sitting behind his desk, wanting to eliminate any barriers between them. Emma immediately crawled onto the couch and began bouncing slightly, delighted by its softness. "Gentle, Mija," Sophia murmured, but Marcus waved off her concern. "It's fine. It's just furniture." He realized as he said it how foreign those words sounded coming from his mouth. Just furniture. For years, everything had been precious, curated, expensive, important. When had he forgotten that things were just things? He looked at Sophia carefully. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, she answered. "I started on the cleaning crew and was promoted to supervisor 8 months ago." "And you bring Emma with you sometimes?" Sophia's back straightened defensively. "Only when absolutely necessary. My sister usually watches her, but sometimes she can't, and daycare doesn't operate at night. I make sure Emma doesn't disturb anyone or touch anything. She's very well behaved." "I can see that," Marcus said softly. "I wasn't criticizing. I'm trying to understand. Trying to understand how you raise someone who could see a stranger and decide to share the thing she loves most because she thought he needed it." Sophia's expression softened slightly. She looked at her daughter, now lying on the couch and staring up at the ceiling, humming softly to herself. "I try to teach her what my mother taught me, that we're all connected, that kindness matters more than possessions, that we should see people, really see them." She paused, then added quietly, "Though I'll admit I'm surprised she gave you Mr. Whiskers. She's never done that before with anyone." "Why do you think she did?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Sophia met his eyes, and he saw compassion there, not judgment. Children see what adults try to hide. She probably recognized something in you, maybe something familiar. "Loneliness," Marcus said quietly. "She said I looked lonely." "Are you?" The question was simple, direct, without any agenda. Marcus found himself answering honestly.
Yes.
Profoundly. Sophia nodded slowly. Money doesn't fix that. No, Marcus agreed. It really doesn't. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound Emma's quiet humming and the distant white noise of the city's 78 floors below. Marcus Wellington didn't go home that night. After Sophia and Emma continued their cleaning rounds, with Emma waving goodbye and reminding him to hug Mr. Whiskers when sad, he sat in his office holding a threadbare teddy bear and felt his carefully constructed life begin to unravel. It wasn't a violent collapse. It was gentler than that, more like ice melting or a clenched fist finally opening. He sat there until dawn, watching the sun rise over Manhattan, thinking about a little girl who had everything that mattered and a man who had nothing that did. At some point during those quiet hours, Marcus made a decision. Or maybe the decision made itself, crystallized by Emma's simple act of kindness. He couldn't keep living this way, isolated, disconnected, going through the motions of a life that had stopped meaning anything years ago. When Jennifer arrived at 8 o'clock, she found him still there, unshaven, wearing yesterday's clothes, looking exhausted but somehow more present than she'd seen him in the 3 years she'd worked for him. "Mr. Wellington? Is everything all right? You look like you've been here all night." "I have," he confirmed. "Jennifer, I need you to do something for me. Something important." She pulled out her tablet, ready for instructions. "Of course. Find out everything you can about Sofia Rodriguez. She's a night cleaning supervisor. I need to know about her situation, childcare arrangements, family circumstances, anything that might be relevant. But be discreet. I don't want her thinking she's under investigation or worried about her job." Jennifer's expression shifted to one of concern. "Is there a problem with—" "No problem," Marcus interrupted gently. "The opposite, actually. Just please find out what you can." "Of course, Mr. Wellington. And Jennifer?" He set Mr. Whiskers carefully on his desk. "Clear my schedule for this afternoon. All of it." "Sir, you have the board meeting at 2, and the—" "Cancel them. Reschedule. I don't care. I need this afternoon free." Jennifer stared at him. In 3 years, Marcus Wellington had never canceled anything, never missed a meeting, never prioritized anything over work. "Are you sure you're feeling all right?" Marcus smiled, and it felt strange on his face, like muscles remembering an old habit. "I'm not sure, but I'm starting to feel something, which is more than I could say yesterday." By noon, Jennifer had compiled a comprehensive file. Sofia Rodriguez, 34 years old, had immigrated from Honduras 6 years ago. She'd worked multiple jobs before landing at Wellington Tower, had no family support except a sister who worked 2 jobs herself, and was raising Emma alone after her boyfriend had left during her pregnancy. She was taking online classes toward a business degree, studying late at night after her shifts. She lived in a small apartment in Washington Heights, almost 2 hours by subway from the tower. Marcus read the file twice, feeling something in his chest tighten with each detail. Here was a woman who had every reason to be bitter, resentful, overwhelmed. Instead, she was raising a daughter who gave teddy bears to sad strangers. That afternoon, Marcus did something he'd never done before. He rode the elevator down to the maintenance and facilities offices in the basement. The fluorescent lights were harsh after the ambient lighting of the executive floor, and the space was functional rather than designed. Industrial shelving, time clocks, rows of lockers, a small break room with a tired coffee pot. Several members of the cleaning crew looked up in shock as Marcus Wellington, in his expensive suit and polished shoes, walked into their domain. A few whispered to each other. One woman actually gasped. "I'm looking for Mrs. Rodriguez," Marcus said to the room at large. "Sofia Rodriguez?" A man in a supervisor's uniform stepped forward cautiously. "She works nights, sir. She won't be in until 7 o'clock. "Right, of course." Marcus hesitated, feeling suddenly foolish. He didn't belong here. He didn't know the protocols, the culture, the rhythms of this part of his own building. "Could you give me her phone number?" The supervisor shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I'm not sure I should. It's not what you think, Marcus said quickly. Her daughter did something kind for me last night. I want to thank her properly. The supervisor studied him for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. He wrote a number on a piece of paper and handed it over. She's a good woman, Mr. Wellington. Works harder than anyone. I'm beginning to understand that, Marcus said softly. He called Sophia from his office, his hand oddly nervous on the phone. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. Of course, she'd worked until 2 in the morning and probably hadn't been asleep long. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Marcus Wellington. I'm sorry to wake you. There was a long pause, then her voice came back, suddenly alert and worried. Mr. Wellington? Is something wrong? Did I do something? No, nothing wrong. I promise. I actually wanted to ask you something. He took a breath. Would you and Emma be willing to have dinner with me? Tonight, before your shift? Somewhere of your choosing. I'd like to thank Emma properly for her gift. Another pause. Mr. Wellington, that's very kind, but you don't need to. Please, he said, and the word came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. I'd really like to, if you're comfortable with it. He could hear her breathing, thinking. Finally, okay. There's a small restaurant in our neighborhood. La Casa Azul. It's nothing fancy. That sounds perfect. What time? They agreed on 5:30, which would give Sophia time to feed Emma and still make it to work by 7. After he hung up, Marcus sat back in his chair, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Nervousness. Actual butterflies in his stomach over a dinner that wasn't about business or networking or image management. He looked at Mr. Whiskers, still sitting on his desk where he'd placed him. The teddy bear's lopsided gaze seemed almost knowing, as if he understood exactly what was happening. Marcus reached out and adjusted the bear's dangling eye, feeling ridiculous and yet somehow compelled to tend to this symbol of what was shifting inside him. What am I doing? He asked the empty office. The bear, naturally, didn't answer. But in Marcus's mind, he heard Emma's tiny voice. You need. She was right. He did need. Not more money or more success or more things. He needed connection. He needed to remember how to be human. He needed to understand how a woman who cleaned offices at night could raise a daughter who saw the world with such clarity and kindness. That evening, Marcus drove himself to Washington Heights in his Tesla, drawing stares as he parallel parked on a street lined with bodegas and small shops. La Casa Azul was exactly as Sophia had described. Nothing fancy, a family restaurant with plastic tablecloths and a menu handwritten in Spanish and English. The smell of cumin and cilantro floated out as he opened the door. Sophia and Emma were already there, sitting in a booth near the window. Emma spotted him first and waved enthusiastically, bouncing in her booster seat. Sophia looked nervous, her hair down for once, wearing jeans and a simple blouse that made her look younger, less burdened. Thank you for coming, Marcus said as he slid into the booth across from them. He'd changed into jeans and a simple shirt, not wanting to show up in a suit and create more distance between them. Thank you for inviting us, Sophia replied formally. Then, seeming to relax slightly, Emma hasn't stopped talking about the sad man with Mr. Whiskers. I brought him back, Marcus said, pulling the teddy bear from the bag he'd carried in. As promised. But when he tried to hand Mr. Whiskers to Emma, she shook her head stubbornly. You still need, she declared. You keep more time. Marcus looked at Sophia helplessly, and she gave him a small smile. When Emma makes up her mind about something, there's no changing it. She's very determined. I wonder where she gets that from, Marcus said, and was rewarded with Sophia's small laugh. They ordered food, pupusas and plantains and things Marcus hadn't eaten in years, if ever. As they waited for their meals, Marcus found himself talking in a way he couldn't remember talking before. Honestly, without agenda, without performance. He told them about his childhood in Brooklyn, about his parents who'd worked hard and loved him well. He told them about his mother's death, about the way he'd thrown himself into work afterward, using success as a bandage for grief. Sophia listened with the kind of attention that made him feel truly heard. She shared her own story, too, leaving Honduras to escape poverty and violence, arriving in America with hope and determination, building a life one difficult step at a time. She spoke about Emma's father without bitterness, just sadness for what her daughter had lost. But Emma doesn't seem to feel like she's missing anything, Marcus observed, watching the little girl happily color on the kids' menu with crayons the waitress had brought. "We have each other," Sophia said simply. "We have enough." Enough. The word landed on Marcus with weight. When had he last felt like he had enough? When had he last felt satisfied, complete, content? He'd always been chasing the next thing, the bigger deal, the higher valuation. Enough had never been part of his vocabulary. Emma finished her coloring and held it up proudly, a drawing that might have been flowers or possibly aliens, rendered in enthusiastic scribbles. "For you," she announced, pushing it across the table to Marcus. He took it carefully, as if it were a priceless painting. "Thank you, Emma. I love it." "You hang in your office," she instructed seriously. "So you remember." "Remember what?" She patted his hand with her tiny one. "Remember you're not lonely anymore." And there it was again, that crack in his defenses widening just a little more. 6 months later, Marcus Wellington stood in his office, but it looked nothing like it had that night when a little girl had found him sitting alone in the dark. The minimalist gray and white had been softened with color. Photographs lined the windowsill, not professional shots, but real moments captured on phones. Plants grew in corners, requiring care and attention. And on his desk, in a small frame, was Emma's drawing of possible flowers or possible aliens, a reminder of what mattered. Mr. Whiskers had eventually been returned to Emma, but Marcus had commissioned a local artist to create a watercolor portrait of the worn teddy bear, which now hung on his wall. Visitors often asked about it, and Marcus always told the story of a 2-year-old girl who taught him more about success than any business school ever had. The changes hadn't stopped with his office decor. Sofia Rodriguez now worked as the Director of Community Relations for the Wellington Foundation, a position Marcus had created specifically for her, though she'd proven she deserved it through her own abilities. The foundation itself was new, established 3 months after that dinner at La Casa Azul, with a mission to support single parents, immigrants, and working families. Sophia had helped Marcus understand what these communities actually needed rather than what wealthy donors thought they needed. Marcus had also instituted new policies across all Wellington companies: on-site childcare for employees working non-traditional hours, increased wages for facilities and cleaning staff, tuition reimbursement programs, and flexible scheduling for parents. Some board members had questioned the costs. Marcus had told them that some things mattered more than the bottom line, and that if they couldn't understand that, they were welcome to resign. None of them had resigned. And surprisingly, employer retention had gone up, productivity had increased, and the company's reputation had soared. Turned out treating people with dignity was good for business too. Who knew? But the biggest change wasn't in policies or positions. It was in Marcus himself. He now left the office at reasonable hours. He'd reconnected with his brother, flying out to Seattle once a month to spend time with his nephew and niece. He'd started volunteering at a youth center in Brooklyn, mentoring kids who reminded him of who he'd once been. He'd learned to cook, to read for pleasure, to take walks through the city just because the weather was nice. And he'd gotten to know Sophia and Emma, their lives weaving into his in ways both unexpected and necessary. Today was Emma's 3rd birthday, and Marcus was closing his laptop early to make it to the party in Washington Heights. Jennifer had learned to protect his time for these commitments the same way she once protected his board meetings. The shift in priorities had been jarring for her at first, but she'd adapted. Everyone had adapted. Heading out, Jennifer asked as he passed her desk, gift bag in hand. "Birthday party," he confirmed. "Emma's turning 3. Jennifer smiled. "Tell her happy birthday for me." and say hi to Sophia. There was something knowing in Jennifer's tone, a suggestion that Marcus had been trying not to examine too closely. Over the past 6 months, his relationship with Sophia had deepened into friendship, into partnership at the foundation, into something that made his heart beat faster when she walked into a room. But he'd been careful, so careful, not to presume anything, not to let his feelings create any pressure or uncomfortable situations. Sophia had her own life, her own dreams. She was taking classes toward her degree, building her career, raising her daughter. Marcus didn't want to complicate that or make her feel obligated to him in any way. He was content, truly content for the first time in decades, just being part of their lives in whatever capacity they wanted him to be. The party was at a small park near Sophia's apartment, with balloons and a homemade cake, and about 20 people who clearly loved Emma and her mother. Marcus recognized a few families from the building, Sophia's sister Maria, some co-workers from the foundation. He was probably the only billionaire there, but no one treated him differently. Sophia had introduced him as our friend Marcus, and that's what he'd become. Emma spotted him immediately and came running, her birthday dress flying behind her. Marcus, Marcus, you came. He crouched down and caught her in a hug, lifting her up and spinning her around the way he'd learned she loved. Of course I came. Happy birthday, Emma. I'm 3 now, she announced proudly, holding up 3 fingers. I'm so big. So big, he agreed solemnly. Soon you'll be taller than me. She giggled at this obvious absurdity. You silly. Sophia approached, wiping her hands on her jeans, looking flustered but happy. Thank you for coming. I know you're busy. I'm never too busy for this, Marcus said, and meant it completely. She smiled, and something passed between them, a recognition that had been building for months. But then Emma was pulling Marcus toward the cake, demanding he meet her friends, insisting he push her on the swings, and the moment passed into the chaos of a 3-year-old's birthday party. Later, after the cake was eaten and the presents opened, Marcus found himself sitting on a park bench next to Sophia, watching Emma play with her new toys. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She got a new teddy bear today, Sophia said, nodding toward Emma, who was indeed clutching a brand new stuffed bear. But she told me Mr. Whiskers is still her favorite because he has important work to do. Important work? She says Mr. Whiskers helps sad people feel better. She's very serious about it. Sophia paused, then added softly, she asks about you when you're not around. Wants to know if you're still lonely. I'm not, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. Not anymore. Thanks to her. Thanks to both of you. Sophia turned to look at him fully. You know what's funny? That night Emma gave you Mr. Whiskers, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen. I was so worried you'd be angry, that I'd lose my job. I never imagined. She gestured vaguely at everything. The park, the party, their friendship, the foundation, all the ways their lives had become interconnected. I never imagined either, Marcus admitted. I thought I had everything figured out. I thought success looked like money and power and things. I didn't know I was dying inside until Emma showed me I was still alive enough to hurt. Children see things we forget, Sophia said. They haven't learned to look away from what matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Emma share her new toys with another little girl, her natural generosity already manifesting again. Sophia, Marcus said finally, his heart pounding. I need to tell you something. She looked at him with those steady eyes, patient and kind. These past 6 months have been the best of my life. Getting to know you, to be part of Emma's life, working together at the foundation, it's shown me what I was missing. What I've always been missing. He took a breath. I care about you. Both of you. As more than friends. And I know this might be complicated, and I know you might not feel the same way, and I promise if you don't, nothing has to change. But I could not tell you anymore. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she smiled. Marcus Wellington, are you telling me it took a 2-year-old to teach you how to say what you feel? He laughed, surprised and relieved. I guess I am. Emma noticed weeks ago, Sophia said. She told me you look at me the same way you look at her chocolate cake, like you really, really want some but you're trying to be polite. Emma said that? Not in those exact words, but essentially yes. Sophia's smile softened. And for the record, I look at you the same way. Yeah. She reached over and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. I was worried too. Worried about what it would mean, how it would change things. Worried that I was misreading signals. Worried that you were just being kind because you felt grateful or guilty or… Marcus turned to face her fully. Sophia, I'm many things, but I'm not that complicated anymore. I'm just a man who was lost until your daughter found me, and who fell in love with the woman who raised someone capable of that kind of compassion. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. You love us. I love you. Both of you. Completely. She leaned forward and kissed him, gentle and certain, and Marcus felt something inside him finally, fully come home. A small voice interrupted them. Mama kissing Marcus. They broke apart to find Emma standing in front of them, grinning widely. She climbed up onto the bench between them and snuggled against Marcus's side. You not sad anymore? She asked, looking up at him. Not even a little bit, Marcus assured her, wrapping his arm around her small shoulders. Mr. Whiskers did good work, Emma declared with satisfaction. The very best work, Marcus agreed. Sophia laughed and wrapped her arms around both of them, and they sat there as the sun set over Washington Heights, a family that hadn't existed 6 months ago, brought together by the wisdom of the smallest person among them. Marcus thought about the man he'd been that night, sitting alone in his office, convinced that his fortress of success was all he needed or deserved. That man felt like a stranger now. He'd thought he'd built an empire, but he'd really just built walls. It had taken a 2-year-old with a teddy bear to show him that the richest life wasn't measured in billions, but in moments like these, in tiny hands trusting him, in a woman seeing who he really was, in love that asked nothing and gave everything. Thank you, he whispered to Emma, kissing the top of her head. Welcome, she said matter-of-factly. Then, you stay for more cake? Always, Marcus promised. I'll always stay for more cake. And he meant it. He'd spent 42 years chasing success and missing life. He wasn't going to waste another moment. As the party continued around them, as Emma eventually wriggled free to play with her friends again, as Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder, and he felt the simple perfection of being exactly where he was meant to be, Marcus understood what his mother had tried to tell him all those years ago. Money could buy comfort, but not peace. Success, but not satisfaction. A house, but not a home. It took love to build those things. It took connection and vulnerability and the courage to be seen, really seen by others. It took a little girl named Emma, a teddy bear named Mr. Whiskers, and a woman named Sophia who taught her daughter that kindness was more valuable than any treasure. Marcus had conquered the business world and lost himself in the process. But in giving away her most precious possession to a lonely stranger, Emma had given him back something far more valuable. She'd given him his humanity. She'd given him permission to feel again, to need again, to love again. And that, Marcus knew as he watched the sunset paint the sky in gold, was worth more than all the billions in the world combined. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest transformations. Sometimes a child's wisdom surpasses all adult understanding. And sometimes, when you think you have everything, you need to lose it all to discover what truly matters. Marcus Wellington had learned that lesson at 3 years old from a teacher who spoke in simple words and shared teddy bears. And he would spend the rest of his life grateful that he'd been sitting in just the right office, at just the right moment, looking just lonely enough for her to notice.